Imam Ahmad Raza, Imam Ahle Sunnat, Imam Ahmad Raza, Imam Ahmad Raza, Imam Ahle Sunnat, Imam Ahmad Raza.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Amma ba'd, fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. My dear respected viewers of Madani Channel, we once again welcome you in our program, Imam of Ahle Sunnat. In this program, we talk about different dimensions of this great personality, genius, Sayyidi Shah Imam Ahmad Raza Khan alayhi rahmatur rahman. And today, the topic what we've selected for you today, that is Science and Imam Ahmad Raza Khan alayhi rahmatur rahman. Dear respected viewers of Madani Channel, today we've got our guest speaker, Dr. Khurram, and who has got in-depth study about Al-Azad's life, and especially in the dimension of science. Inshallah, we will be talking on this very topic. And we've got our brother Nasir with us, who will recite Naat. We'll also include one Kalam of Al-Azad rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, and we'll explain that in English for you, and Naat Khan brother will also recite it. So be with us from start to end today. An immense amount of knowledge, interesting piece of knowledge you're going to get. But before we proceed towards our main topic, let's make few good intentions. Shaykh Tariqat, Imam of Ahle Sunnat, Hazrat Allama Maulana Muhammad Ilyas Attar Qadri, Damat Barakatuhum Al-Aliyah, has given us a beautiful mindset. We should make good intentions before we perform any good deed or any permissible task. I make this intention, inshallah, that I will present this program for the pleasure of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. You all should make this intention. You will be with us from start till end. You'll remember what you learn, you'll act upon. Not only that, you'll pass this knowledge on to others too. Let's go to our panel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Nasib, how are you doing?
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. How are you?
Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you so much for coming in this program. Nasir bhai, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you? You okay? MashaAllah, Jazakallah for coming. Subhanallah. Today, dear respected viewers, we are going to talk about science and Imam of Ahle Sunnah, Shah Imam Ahmad Raza Khan alayhi rahmatur rahman. No doubt he was a faqih, he was mujaddid, he was alim, he was scholar, he was genius in terms of religious knowledge. But subhanallah, in his works, we also find some pieces, some extractions, even some of the topics he has written books on. And when we see them, we find out many sciences, many branches of knowledge, they appear in his work. And I would like to quote a few of them. As the modern sciences are concerned, their knowledge is also reflected in the works of Al-Azad rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. Physics, zoology, mineralogy, chemistry, pharmacy, medicine, finance, economics, statistics, commerce, geography, geology, political science, international relations, mathematics, you name, subhanallah, many branches of sciences. Ulama, they've written, dear respected viewers, that some of them they've written he had command on 50 branches of knowledge. Some they said 75 or more. Some they said 100 branches of knowledge he had command on. But the scholars, they believe that this is what we have been able to understand, the knowledge he possessed, the knowledge he was granted by Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. This is what has been discovered so far. You never know, in the future course of time, there are so many other branches of knowledge which can also be discovered from his works. So far, 100 branches of knowledge, it seems that Al-Azad rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh has written on these topics, and they have been written by the researchers, those they have researched. Let's go towards our guest speaker, Dr. Khurram Nisar Attari. Doctor, today's topic is science and Al-Azad rahmatullahi ta'ala. Being a medical student, definitely those, they are medical students, they have got study, in-depth study of science also. So definitely you would be the very right person to speak on this subject. How would you start when it comes the knowledge of science and Al-Azad Shah Imam Ahmad Raza Khan alayhi rahmatur rahman as a scientist?
So, Jazakallah khaira for offering me the opportunity to discuss on this topic, because you're absolutely right. I think if I could summarize it in one word, I would say that Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is the neglected giant of the East. All his services to science, they have somehow been curtained over by everything, by all this, the cloud and the smoke around him. Otherwise, if we look closely, and as you said, command over 120 subjects, and that's not, command to an extent where he could offer something. He could actually was in a position to teach. And
he had also written something on that. You find books and pieces of extractions from his works, isn't it?
Absolutely right. That if you look at the over 120 subjects in which he had such a great command on, and we think of him as an Islamic scholar, as a revivalist. But what we forget is that in addition to what he offered, his deep understanding of different branches of science through his jurisprudence, through all the Islamic rulings he gave, he actually wrote standalone books. Over 1,000 books were written by Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. And there are standalone books on these different subjects of science. So just to give you an example, if you look at numerology, he has written 11 books just on numerology. And if I could give a couple of examples, so Ata'ibul Iksir fil Ilm al-Taksir, that's one example. Hashia ad-Durr al-Maknoon, then he has written 1,152 Murabba'at. They're all examples of, and Mujtal al-Urus. So these are just some examples of those 11 books he wrote on numerology. If we look at logarithm, which is considered part of the modern mathematics, exactly. He has written 8 books on logarithm. So it's again just to give you some examples of that. So he has got Al-Muhawwabat fil Murabba'at, then Kitab al-Rasmar Tabaqa, and Al-Budur fil Awjil Majzur. So again, some of the examples of his book on logarithmy. If you look at his examples on trigonometry, which is again another branch of science.
Right. Mathematics.
Mathematics. He has written, Risala Ilm Muthallath. Then there is Wujuh Zawaya Muthallas Kurawi. So these are all different parts of trigonometry, and he's written standalone books on that. If you look at algebra, he's written 4 books. If you look at mathematics, so these are some examples of that, he's written 31 books on mathematics. And then if we look at astrology, he has written over 22 books in the subject of astrology. So this is just 5 examples of over 120 subjects which he had command on.
And he was not a graduate of mathematics or astrology or all these sciences you are naming, but
exactly. Absolutely. And that famous incident from Sir Ziauddin, who's the Vice Chancellor of the university, when he was so impressed by his knowledge of trigonometry, the thesis which Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullah Ta'ala had written, very famous incident, when he was asked, where did you learn all of this? And he said, my respectable father, Maulana Naqi Ali Khan Rahmatullah Ta'ala, when I tried to read more, I had learned 4 basic principles: addition, division, subtraction, multiplication. When I tried to read more, my respectable father said, Ahmad Raza, you don't need to waste your time on this. Focus on Islamic studies, and by the grace of that, everything else will be awarded to you. So what you're seeing, this is an award. You haven't even seen my actual knowledge, my actual specialty, my specialization. So, and this again highlights that all this are, the examples of these hundreds of books he's written on these different branches of science, on the subject of time, which is a discussion topic for quantum physics, the latest branch of physics. There are people who are talking about time and its direction, its flow, and Sayyid Ala Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he had written books on just this concept of time. So there are over 8 books which is written on that, and one of the very famous one is Azij al-Awqat al-Sawm al-Salat. So that's where he expected times for the prayers and then Istinbat al-Awqat, then Al-Anjib al-Aniq. All of these examples of just the concept of time. So so these are things which our modern students don't even know of. If I were to ask some a student of a modern university or a school, even if he had heard of the name of Imam of Ahle Sunnat, Ala Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he would probably remember him as an Islamic scholar.
Sure.
He doesn't even know all of this which is offered in the branches. We'll discuss his services to physics, how he's talked about time,
sound,
light, water, atmosphere, environment,
Subhanallah.
all of these topics which are so relevant to us. He wrote about them over a century ago, and they're still based on those concepts that as relevant as they were there today, they were at that time.
MashaAllah. Doctor, one beautiful point you mentioned that Al-Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayh, he always believed that my father had told that learn the basic principles and other will be granted to you. And one beautiful example when he writes the name of his great work, which was the verdicts he had given, the rulings on Islamic rulings, subhanallah, fatawa. So he writes the name Al-Ataya Al-Nabawiyya Fil Fatawa Al-Radawiyya. So when he writes the name of this book, which is around 33 volumes, massive work he had done, and he refers that this is grant from the court of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or this is the award from the court of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Exactly.
So he worked on religious knowledge. So other knowledges, other branches of sciences, they were awarded from Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala and Prophet Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, isn't it?
Absolutely. Beautiful example. So this is, despite the fact that thousands of that jurisprudence rulings were actually lost in time. So this is what we could find and what we could compile. 6,847 questions he's answered in Fatawa Radawiyya, with over 33 volumes, as you said, over 22,000 pages cover that. And this is the extracted version from that with some explanation. In that, under the discussion, he writes 206 booklets.
Allah.
So for one question, he would sometimes reply by writing a whole booklet.
As normally, some of the Muftiyani Kalam, when they give verdict, they say, okay, yes, no, jaiz, najaiz, okay, halal, haram. So in 2 words or 3 words or one-liner answer. But subhanallah, the knowledge of Allah, rahmatullahi ta'ala, he writes books.
That's right.
On just one question.
Exactly. That was the beauty. So all of that 206 booklets are covered just in this one book. So as I said, 1,000 books were written, and these 206 booklets, they come under one book. And one of the beautiful thing is when you're talking about the preamble, the preface. Look at the beauty of the preface which he had written in Fatawa Radawiyya, that khutbah which is written. 90 names he brought in that khutbah. And the scholars say that anyone who can read that khutbah is an alim himself. And in that, he brought the names of all the books which were written before. And in addition, there were names of people as well. So he brought the name of Aimma Kiram, of the books, and he brought them to describe the grandeur of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is what I want to highlight quickly, that when it comes to writing on a topic, where you say, look, now someone has written so much that it's impossible to expand upon that. That is the quality of Sayyidi Ahle Rahmatullah Ta'ala. And actually that also comes under a branch of science which has been not very well reflected and it's relatively unknown, and that's taxonomy.
Yeah.
So I've said about this example of 90 names, which he's brought the different names and joined them together. It's like beautiful pearls in a rosary, the way Sayyidi Ahle Rahmatullah Ta'ala has done. So one question comes to him again in Fatawa Radawiyya Sharif regarding funeral prayer. And the question was asked about funeral prayer. And in answer to that, he wrote 57 pages to answer this one question about funeral prayer.
Allahu Akbar.
Under that, he brought 130 pieces of evidence from the prior 1,300 years of books. He brought 133 evidence, and in total, if you count the references in bibliography, 207 references he gave to support his ruling. 207 references, that is an answer to one question.
Subhanallah.
Another question came to in Kitabun Nikah, and there was a question around that. He gave 90 books as reference to answering one question in Fatawa Radawiyya Sharif. Then somebody asked him a question about sajda. He brought 40 ahadith and 150 pieces of evidence again to support his viewpoint.
Nasser, I would like to stop you here because viewers of Madani Channel could be thinking that they've got a topic that is related to science, but they're talking about his fatwa. So if you could elaborate, what is taxonomy and how are you relating that to the works of Allah? So then better understanding for the viewers.
Absolutely. So I think so taxonomy is the branch which helps, it's a branch of science which helps with classification.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we look at all the species which are found in the world,
Right.
so we have a species of humans, we have species of animals, of plants, of invertebrates. So all science students, biology students would
Right, they know that.
we classify them, and that is called taxonomy. So we have taxonomy of viruses, very relevant topic nowadays. So when we talk about coronavirus, that is part of taxonomy. Somebody read it to decide that it falls under this family,
Right.
and under this branch of this family. That's why it should be called coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2. That is one example of taxonomy.
Right.
So when you have a lot of knowledge about, for example, viruses or bacteria or even humans, what you want to do is one of the science is to actually bring it all together and do an algorithm or a flow chart,
Right.
which then helps at one
They
glance
categorize them.
to categorize them. At one glance, you can see where does this particular animal fit,
Right.
where does this particular organism sit. That comes in a taxonomy. So nobody has ever demonstrated it so beautifully, perhaps in the history, as Sayyidi Ala Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala did when he said, let me show you how it's done.
Subhanallah.
You are classifying animals and humans and plants and shrubs and herbs. I'll classify all the books which have been written on this topic.
Subhanallah.
And so if a reader wanted to, and then the other thing which is important here is that everybody knows that when you talk about the very high ranking journals, be it in medical science or human sciences or whatever it is, the more references someone is given, the more authentic that piece of evidence is, that piece of research
Definitely.
is. Because it basically shows that this person has read in depth all the prior knowledge
Supported with evidence.
and supported with evidence. So that's why we are always looking for evidence. Where is the evidence for that? That is the beauty of Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. He does not leave it to the reader to go and find out. He says, let me give you the evidence. I have read these books. Let me show you. These are the examples of this. So that's what he's done. Meat, for example, so we eat different, kinds of meat.
Right.
But which parts of meat, of a halal meat, should not be eaten? So a lot of different scholars had written, some had given 5 examples, 7 examples, these things. Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullahi Ta'ala brought it all together using his knowledge of taxonomy and classification, and he said 22 pieces of meat which shouldn't be eaten even in halal meat. And scholars have written that no one has ever compiled that list in the history before, as Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullahi Ta'ala did. When someone questioned so a very famous Durood-e-Taj, and someone questioned about the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's attribute, which is Dafil Balai wal Wabai. So that is so someone questioned that and said, can we use those words for the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Sayyidi Ala Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he wrote one book, Al-Amn wal-Ula, and he brought 300 ahadith to confirm that it is absolutely fine and desirable to say Dafil Balai Wabai. That was his understanding of science, that if you want to explain something, this is the way to do it. And he all used scientific principle for that.
MashaAllah, beautiful. Very respected viewers of Madani Channel. Now it's the time to include one Kalam of Ahle Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala as per format of the program. Today we have selected a beautiful Kalam of Ahle Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, that is, Hum Khak hain aur khak hi ma'wa hai hamara, khaki to wo Adam jade ala hai hamara. We are dust, and indeed our refuge is the dust. Indeed our forefather Adam was also created from dust. Subhanallah. Ahle Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is talking about that we are dust, we have been created from dust. And actually he is referring to one of the ayahs of Quran where it says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن تُرَابٍ مِنْهَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ وَفِيهَا نُعِيدُكُمْ وَمِنْهَا نُخْرِجُكُمْ تَارَةً أُخْرَى. So here, subhanallah, as we know that the poetry of Ahle Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is also a shara of Quran. So he is bringing those beautiful explanations or the text from the Quran, what has been mentioned in Quran, he brings in his naat, and he says that Jade Ala, our forefather Adam ala nabiyina alayhi salatu salam, was also created from dust. We are also dust. So our indeed refuge is also dust. हम खाक हैं और खाक ही मअवा है हमारा, खाकी तो वो आदम जद आला है हमारा.
हम खाक हैं और खाक ही मावा है हमारा, हम खाक हैं और खाक ही मावा है हमारा, खाकी तो वो आदम जदे आला है हमारा, खाकी तो वो आदम जदे आला है हमारा.
Subhanallah, Subhanallah. Another couplet, Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayhi says, जिस खाक पे रखते थे कदम सैयद आलम, उस खाक पे कुर्बान दिल शैदा है हमारा. Allahu Akbar. He says, the dust upon which tread the feet of the creation's leader, my devoted heart wills to be sacrificed upon that dust. That is self-explanatory, subhanallah. He's talking about Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam's blessed feet are touched to the dust of Medina. May my heart be sacrificed onto that dust. Subhanallah. This खाक पे रखते थे कदम.
जिस खाक पे रखते थे कदम सैयद आलम, जिस खाक पे रखते थे कदम सैयद आलम, उस खाक पे कुर्बान दिले शहदा है हमारा, उस खाक पे कुर्बान दिले शहदा है हमारा.
Subhanallah. Another couplet Hazrat writes, खम हो गई पुश्त फलक इस ताने ज़मीं से, सुन हम पे मदीना है ये रुतबा है हमारा. Allahu Akbar. Subhanallah. Dear respected viewers, this is one of the masterpieces of Ahle Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala and his poetry. Ahle Hazrat is writing the conversation between sky and the earth. Allahu Akbar. And this conversation happened when the sky said, I am elevated. Okay, my status and my maqam and rutbah is elevated and high. Allahu Akbar. And when the earth replied to this conversation, the earth said, Sun hum pe Madina hai ye rutbah hai hamara. When the sky heard this, it bent forward like this. That's the reason the sky looks like this, bent it. Allah is saying metaphorically why the sky looks bent. The reason is the sky bent forward in humility upon hearing this from the earth. Listen, such is my honor, the city of the Prophet, rest upon my dust. Sun hum pe Madina hai, wo rutbah hai hamara.
कम हो गई पूछते फलक इस तान ज़मीं से, कम हो गई पूछते फलक इस तान ज़मीं से, सुन हम पे मदीना है वो रुतबा है हमारा, सुन हम पे मदीना है वो रुतबा है हमारा.
Subhanallah, Subhanallah. Doctor, this is Ahle Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala and how beautifully he is explaining Subhanallah in the poetry. But we were talking about the science in Ahle Hazrat as a topic. What other branches of science Ahle Hazrat seems to write in his works?
So it's just actually this, the couplet reminded me how beautifully he's talked about celestial bodies. So he's talked about earth, the sky. So a beautiful branch of science is astrology, which talks about celestial bodies.
Right.
So again, to give you an example, so this branch of science, astrology and astrophysics, which again is now very prevalent at the moment. But there was a time when there was a lot of confusion around it, because also people did not understand the motion of these celestial bodies and how all these planets work and the sun and the stars and all of that. So now again, remember, it's important to contextualize that we are talking about times over a century ago. Knowledge has moved on a lot since then. at that time, there was a very famous professor, Albert F. Porter,
Right.
from USA, who basically gave a prediction that on 17th December of 1919, so the First World War had just finished, the year after, 17th December 1919, I have read the planetary motion, and on that particular day, there will be 6 celestial bodies which will come together and destroy the Earth.
Okay.
So that was the prediction he gave. He was a very famous professor, and that caused a huge uproar around the world. And obviously, those were not the days of social media. So it takes, from newspapers. So there's Express News, which was published from India.
Right.
So they covered that as a top story, and that caused a wave of fear, even amongst Muslims.
Right.
So that, the famous professor has said, and something terrible is going to happen, and it will be cataclysmic, and there will be huge collision, and this will be doomsday. Right. That's how the prediction was. And Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, who of course is the guardian of the principles of Quran, and he said, believers, you need to research something. When a news comes, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala orders us in the Holy Quran, فَتَبَيَّنُوا. You need to research it. So where is your research? And then Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala said, so now it falls upon me to safeguard the faith, the iman of our believers, of my Muslim brothers, of the Ummah. Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, now look at the depth of his knowledge in this branch of astrology. So he wrote a paper at that time, and that paper he brought 17 arguments. And then he actually made a very subtle remark towards the end and said, because he said it would happen on 17th December, hence I have brought 17 pieces of evidence against his point.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah.
And if I wanted, I could bring 10,000. But I would just leave it there because 17 would suffice.
No doubt, he would have brought, because he had ilm ladunni, no doubt.
Absolutely, because it was all inspired knowledge. And then in that, he based on the planetary motion, he calculated the angles of motion of the planets. He looked at the laws of attraction, looked at the relative densities of the materials. He looked at the Earth's diameter. Then he also looked at time differences across different parts of the globe. He looked at the laws of motion and stress. And then he published the exact position of where Earth would be at that time, which he had predicted, and used all of that. And he drew beautiful diagrams, which actually readers can still go and see. They are present in his book. And he used those diagrams to show exactly where the Earth would be, and proved that nothing would happen on 17th December. The Earth would, the life will continue as normal. And the day came and went and nothing happened. And then this was then covered by all big media outlets. That an Islamic scholar, a scholar of Muslims, has proved a famous scientist wrong by actually using his own principles, so the principles which he used the same principles of science. And he said this was his command on the laws of astrology. But again, why he did that? To safeguard the faith of Muslims.
Also, it is written that Maulvi Barkat Ahmad Sahab Siddiqui Pili Bheti, he says that Allah Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayhi had a command that he could figure out exact time after watching at the motion of planets and the stars. And when it was checked on the watch, it would exactly match to the seconds, same time. So what would you say on to this beautiful command of Allah?
Absolutely. So this was, mashallah, his command on what is ilm al-tawqeed, or the knowledge of time. So obviously this is one of the skills which is now nearly extinct, because obviously we now have watches and clocks. But in those days, despite the fact they were available, Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he had such great command on the planetary motion, the motion of stars, and all the celestial bodies, that just by looking at them, right, which used to happen in old days before the clocks, that people would actually define dimension, the way of travel, as well as the time of the day and night by looking at the moon, the stars, and the sun, and they could work it out. And Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, his knowledge of this branch of science was to that extent that he would be able to match up to second correct.
Subhanallah.
And that is not just here. I mean, in all the examples we look at, for example, deciding the times. So, for example, the Dawat Islami's app for prayer times. that is also based on the formulae which were given by Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. And by using that formula, wherever you are in the world, over 2.2 million cities have been covered in this app from Dawat Islami. All comes from one formula, which was based on a complex logarithmic formula, which Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala gave. Wherever you are in the world, with that, you can actually calculate up to second correct the time of prayers.
SubhanAllah. And that's what once happened. Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he was leading a salah of Fajr, and he lengthened the qiraat. And Maulana Abdul Qadir, after the salam, he had a doubt that maybe the time had finished.
That's right.
And we had crossed the time. For Fajr salah, we should not cross the time. And when he Rahmatullahi Ta'ala went out to see the sun, so Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala mentioned that still 2 minutes and 48 seconds are still remaining
to sunrise.
Allahu Akbar.
Exactly. So that's how exact his knowledge was. So obviously he could read people. So obviously he could read that's what they were worried about. And he said, don't worry, I have calculated
even
it all.
48 seconds.
Even 48
Allahu
seconds. You
Akbar.
could say that. Absolutely. That's how incredible. And that, so it's, so time is one example, and we could discuss a lot about that in terms of, where quantum physics and all of these branches are working, and Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala had such control. But similar to that, there is a very famous incident which happened, which was, so this is describing time. Then Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, where it comes inspired knowledge, the one step ahead, which is control of time. So when that astrologist came to Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala and said, I can draw a map and I can calculate when it's going to rain. And Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala said, you know that everything is in the control and command of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So how can you predict that? And he said, oh, I can do it. I've been doing it for years and all of that. So he, she said, Allah Rahmatullah Ta'ala said, okay, well, do it. So he calculated and said, okay, there's no rain this week. It will come next week. And Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he said, well, if Allah Ta'ala wishes, then it can happen now.
It's possible.
It's possible. Everything is possible by His Qudrat. So, and at that time, that's, so to quickly shorten it, Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he said, well, how is that possible? This is my knowledge, my knowledge of astrology and all of that, and based on that cloud motion and everything else, I can tell you. And Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala said, what's the time now? And he said, it was 11:45. How long to 12:30? 45 minutes. And is it possible that 12:30 could happen now? Said, no, of course it will happen after 45 minutes. Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah, he walked to the clock, turned the arms himself, and then it hit 12:30. And he said, well, this is what you have done. Otherwise it would not have happened. So Sayyidi Rahmatullah said, that's exactly I'm trying to say. If Allah Ta'ala wishes, then it could happen now. The moment he said that, it started to rain. So that was his control. Of course, it was his
Karama also, saintly miracles at the same time.
Exactly.
And belief also.
Exactly. But that was his belief, that whatever knowledge of science we have, we must not forget that science
should follow Islam.
Islam
shouldn't follow science.
Exactly. So science is a subordinate of Islam. It has to always submit to the will of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. As long as it does so, there is no harm in learning it, no harm in propagating it. But if at any point you are in conflict between the religion and science, then you must remember that religion always takes priority. That's what he showed. And there are, if we look at, so we talked a lot about physics. I want to quickly give example of chemistry.
Please.
Because that's another, branch of science where, we generally know of organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. Yeah. The beauty of Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala is that he had incredible knowledge of both branches of chemistry. So I want to give a couple of examples here to just demonstrate. One is around, and again, the overriding theme has always been, it is in the context of Islam, of Sharia. So someone asked him about tayammum. So tayammum, obviously, when there is no water available and we want to attain cleanliness, then one of the things our Sharia teaches us is tayammum. So a question comes around tayammum, and the answer could have been very brief, that when you don't have water within this, within a mile, for example, or whatever the ruling is, it could have been explained. Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullah Ta'ala, when he answered this question, he gave 175 situations for where water may not be available. And why could that be? And scholars have written that prior to him, there were only 40 or 50 such scenarios mentioned in 1200 years history of Islamic books. Sayyid Azhar Rahmatullah Ta'ala added to that list 175 situations, and then he gave 160 types of situations where it was okay to do wudu instead of tayammum, and he gave 146 examples of when it will be ineligible to do wudu and we should do tayammum. And related to that, then the question is, okay, well, water might be available, but it may not be clean. So then how do you decide which water is okay for wudu, which water is not okay for wudu? So, and similarly for tayammum, because for tayammum, things have to be from the origin of earth. So anything which is used for tayammum, it has to be from the origin should be from earth. So Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he wrote down a list of 311 things and said, of these 181 you can do tayammum with, and of these 130 you cannot do tayammum with. And then he even said that of the 181, 74 are already known, and 107 I have added to the list based on the modern knowledge of all the substances which have been discovered since then. So this is geology, this is mineralogy, under the branch of inorganic chemistry. And he gave examples, instead of 107 I've added, and those where you can't do tayammum with, I have added another 72 to the prior list of 58. And then he also writes, he said, look at this and remember this list because you won't find it anywhere else. So one of the things which is important here is that to have command of science, that's different. To also know the limits of science which have been in the last 12 centuries. So he knew that by the grace of Allah Ta'ala, that look at this list because you won't find this list anywhere else. So by the grace of Allah Ta'ala, he knew everything which had been published up to that point. And then he gave that example. And the amazing thing was that this question came when someone asked him, can we use coral? The corals which are found in the oceans. The question was, can we do tayammum with coral? So he explained what a coral is. He discussed the origin of coral. He discussed the locations of coral. He discussed the physical characteristics of coral. He discussed all of that and then added this list and said there are 311 substances. All came in response to one question.
Subhanallah.
And he, so there are here oceans of knowledge flowing. So how much knowledge he would need to know the substances, the chemistry, the physical characteristics, the chemical characteristics, the attributes of all the substances, to then be able to say...
And how many books he had already read to know all these which have been already existing and mentioned in the books.
Exactly.
Subhanallah. Doctor, I would like to bring your attention towards another branch of knowledge which Al-Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayhi has mentioned. He has written about sound and he's also written about light. If you talk about sound, he's written one complete book where he talks about sounds captured by the gramophone, right? And it is mentioned that he has also written about photography, okay? And where he has discussed about what is sound, okay, why does it produce, and how do we listen, right? And does it finish or does it remain, okay, in the atmosphere? And he's talked about the existence of the sound when it touches to the ear and all that, subhanallah. And does it exist even when a person dies or not? So these are the, subhanallah, I'm just mentioning a few of them which is written here. Could you please expand on this?
Yeah, so that's again, so now we're moving from chemistry to physics now. So his command on physics was such. So there are two examples. So light is one and sound is another one. So the sound question actually came because in those days the gramophone had been very prevalent, very common. And someone asked a question, can you record Quran in gramophone? And is it okay to listen to that? Obviously, now we're very used to CDs and DVDs and all of that. And some people who are anti-collector, they might still have a gramophone where there used to be this big plate which would revolve under a little needle. So obviously that was in those days new. And the question was very sound, that, can you hear...
What does Islam say about it?
What does Islam say about it? So an answer could have been very simple, which is, yes, it's permissible, or no, it's not permissible. It could have been very simple. In answer to that, Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he wrote a whole booklet. And that was called Al-Kashf al-Shafiya fi Hukmi Phonographiya. And he discussed the phonogram, the gramophone and how it works. And under that, he answered there's 6 characteristics he talked about sound. So he said, actually, in order to understand this, you first need to understand what is sound, how it's produced, how does it propagate, how does it reach your ear? Does it reach inner ear or outer ear?
Subhanallah.
So now we know as medical students that the ear has 3 parts: external ear, middle ear, and internal ear.
Right.
And it is the internal ear's responsibility to listen to the sound, pass it on to the brain, and then there is a center in the brain which then interprets it for us to understand it.
Subhanallah.
And Sayyidi Ahle Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he's talking about these different parts of ear.
Subhanallah.
And then under that, he actually covered the amplitude of sound waves, the reflection of sound waves, rarefaction of sound waves, diffraction of sound waves. And then he discussed the damped harmonic motion of waves, which then was actually known as a separate physical theory. Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he discussed that. He also discussed for sound, you need a medium to travel, and that's why there is a difference between sound waves which travel in air versus the sound waves whether they can travel in water. So if you try to speak underwater, we can't hear properly because the sound waves can't traverse through that medium of water. So Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he discussed those differences as well. The density of air, the density of water.
Subhanallah.
And then one step further, just to complete on the topic of sound, another question came to him, and the question was around ultrasound. So question basically was, can you find out the gender of a baby with an ultrasound? So again, for my viewers, just to understand, sound has different spectrum.
Right.
So human ear is able to hear between 20 decibels and 20,000 decibels.
Right.
So this decibel is a unit of sound. So between that, human ear can hear. Anything below 20 decibels or above, we can't hear. So anything which is over 20,000 decibel is called ultrasound. So examples of that, for example, bats. So bats can actually emit waves which travel at 35,000 decibels. Right. So they are blind. But then they can send those sound waves, and from the reflection of sound waves, bats can work out whether it is a tree in front of them or whether it's open air. So even bats have that quality, and that same principle is then used for sonar devices, which are used in underwater appliances. So for example, in the battles, for example, all these underwater devices, they use sonar, all based on this ultrasound example. So the ultrasound, I use it as a rheumatologist. I look at the joints of people, so I can find out whether they have inflammation or not, which is not visible to naked eye. But because of that difference of medium between an inflamed tissue and a normal tissue, ultrasound reflection will be different. Machine interprets it.
Right.
And then that is called piezoelectric phenomenon. And then it can help me whether it is inflamed joint or a normal joint.
Right.
Same is the thing with if there is to try and find the gender of the baby, so using the ultrasound. So this question comes to Al-Hazrat before 1920. So we're talking about over 100 years ago. Someone sends him this question, and Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he described ultrasound in response to that question. What is ultrasound? He described that and said, it's a very long discussion he actually held about all the things which I'm just telling now. And then in the end he said, of course, by the grace of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, it is possible to know what's hidden inside mom's womb through ultrasound. And this is when ultrasound machines used to be the size of this room. They were not these little portable ones which I can now use through my phone. Huge machines it used to be to cover the whole area. That's how primitive the ultrasound technology was. And even then, Sayyidi Rahmatullahi Ta'ala was able to predict that ultrasound can easily help identify that. And then the time showed that he was true well before his contemporaries would answer that question.
Beautiful, beautiful. My dear Islamic brothers, we're talking about a genius personality, scientist, Imam Ahmad Raza Khan, Alayhi Rahman. Today, the knowledge he possessed in science. Dear respected viewers, let's now include a few more couplets of Imam of Ahle Sunnat, Shah Imam Ahmad Raza Khan, Alayhi Rahman, in our segment Kalam of Raza. Al-Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayhi, he writes, उसने लक़ब खाक शहनशाह से पाया, उसने लक़ब खाक शहनशाह से पाया, जो हैदर कर्रार के मौला है हमारा. सुभान अल्लाह. हज़रत Ali karramallahu ta'ala wajhahul kareem, he had one laqab and he used to love that laqab, and that was Abu Turab, right? And this was the laqab, the title of Sayyidina Ali karramallahu ta'ala wajhahul kareem, which he loved so much, which was given by Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam to him. And Al-Hazrat is referring that title of Sayyidina Ali karramallahu ta'ala wajhahul kareem, that usne laqab khak shahenshah se paya, meaning Sayyidina Ali karramallahu ta'ala wajhahul kareem got this title from Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, jo haidar karrar ke maula hai hamara, who is our Mawla. And again, this Mawla here, the word, it is also an explanation of a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, where Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam seems to say that man kuntu mawla fahada aliyun mawla. So dear respected viewers of Madani Channel, this is the beauty of Al-Hazrat rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi. He brings parts of a hadith in his poetry and he mentions, subhanallah, how beautifully in the poetry. Usne laqab khak shahenshah se paya.
उसने लक़ब खाक शहंशाह से पाया, उसने लक़ब खाक शहंशाह से पाया, जो है दिल कर्रा के मौला है हमारा, जो है दिल कर्रार के मौला है हमारा.
Subhanallah. And then further he writes, है खाक से तामीर मज़ार शह कौनैन, है खाक से तामीर मज़ार शह कौनैन, मअमूर इसी खाक से क़िबला है हमारा. Subhanallah, this word खाक, how beautifully he is bringing in different meanings. This is the command on the poetry of our Hazrat rahmatullahi ta'ala, how eloquent personality he is. Allahu Akbar. He says, this is the dust from where the mazar, the shrine of Mustafa sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam is being created. And again, the Qibla, the house of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, that is also created through this dust, through this khak. Actually, the stone, when you go, we are talking about science, inshallah Dr. will also talk about it. When you go into its origins, then definitely this stone is also from the dust itself. Allahu Akbar. And how beautifully Allah Hazrat rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi writes this word. And I think this also reflects his knowledge of science when he's using this, subhanallah, in this poetry. है खाक से तामीर मज़ार शह कौनैन,
है खाक से तामीर मज़ार शह कौनैन, है खाक से तामीर मज़ार शह कौनैन, मामूर इसी खाक से किबला है हमारा, मामूर इसी खाक से है किबला हमारा.
And then finally he says, हम खाक उड़ाएंगे जो वो खाक ना पाई, आबाद रजा जिस पे मदीना है हमारा. Al-Hazrat says, O Raza, the dust upon which the city of Prophet exists, we shall indeed be losers if we do not attain that dust. Dear respected viewers of Madani Channel, it could be his wish that he is buried in Madinatul Nabi Zalahallahu Shirfa wa Ta'zima, and hum khak udaenge. This is a beautiful, you can say, proverb in Urdu, right? That if we are deprived from that, then we would really remain worried, okay? And this is what Al-Hazrat rahmatullahi ta'ala using that beautiful proverb in Urdu which contains the word khak, and he's bringing into this poetry, subhanallah. If we did not get that dust, हम खाक उड़ाएंगे जो वो खाक ना पाई. And Raza says, Abad Raza, जिस पे मदीना है हमारा. May Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala give us tawfiq that we die in Madinat Nabi Zadaha Allahu Sharfa wa Ta'zima. वो दिन खुदा करे कि मदीने को जाएं हम, खाके दरे रसूल का सुरमा बनाएं हम. दिल दर्द से बिस्मिल की तरह लौट रहा हो, सीने पे तसल्ली को तेरा हाथ धरा हो. गर वक्त अजल सर तेरी चौकट पे पड़ा हो, जितनी हो क़ज़ा एक ही सजदे में अदा हो. Dr. Sahab, we're talking about science and Ahle Sunnat rahmatullahi ta'ala. Time doesn't permit me to take it further. Really, it's such an interesting and amazing topic, and mashallah, you're elaborating beautifully. In the concluding session, if you could say, we are just getting closer to the end of this program, what beautiful branch of science which is written in the books of Ala Hazrat, or Ala Hazrat is explained, or you see him as a person who has command on that? Would like to share with you.
So yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, again, time can, we can't do justice to the scientific services, his endeavors in the field of science. So his understanding of modern medicine, how he understood about polypharmacy, the comorbidities, the comorbidity index, the impact of environment and atmosphere. There's so much to talk about medicine. There's so much more to talk about human sciences, the social sciences. He had such great command on. So one last example I just want to use is from physics again, on about light. And related to that is that again we'll conclude by understanding why he did all of that. I think that's the key thing, is that yes, he had such great command of science. Why did he do all of that? And the question was around Miraj. So this is the English Miraj, which is when if at a distance you see something which and you think it's there, you get there, it's not there. So it used to happen obviously in desert travels to people when they thought there was an oasis, a water pool, and when they went there was
Sarab, you mean?
Sarab, that's right.
Illusion. I think that's
it's like illusion. That's right. So that mirage or illusion. So that was the question to Sayyidi Alas Rahmatullahi Ta'ala about that. In order to explain it, again, Sayyidi Alas Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, he explained refraction of light. And then not just atmospheric refraction, he talked about geometric refraction of light. He talked about theories of light. He talked about laws of light. Then he also talked about how the differential effect of densities of different matters would have impact on the travel of light. He discussed all of that. For example, to give you an example, that the distance of the sun from the earth, it takes about 8 minutes and 23 seconds for the sun rays to reach the earth. Because light can travel through space. However, sound can't travel through space, and there is a difference there. So Sayyid Alas Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he also discussed the difference between light and sound. And then the famous incidents where that Professor Ziauddin, when he came and he asked him about all these difficult questions from mathematics, one of his departing thoughts was, he said, well, you have such great command. Tell me that the sun is rising, we can see the twilight, but we can't see the sun. How come that sunrise and the twilight is visible before the sun comes out? So just explain that. And now, obviously, to us, he would have explained perhaps differently, but here it is a professor who's come with this great aura around him. So Sayyid Alas Rahmatullah Ta'ala, he said, okay, well, you like experiments, because that's how you learn. Let me demonstrate an experiment for you. So he gets a bowl, and he puts a coin in the bowl. And then he asks him to step further to a point where he can't see the coin at the bottom of the bowl. He asks him, can you see this? No. And then he gets some water. He pours water in the bowl. Can you see it? No. Until the time comes when the water has risen, brings the coin with it, and now is able to see. And he said, yes, now I can see. So he says, what stopped you? The coin was always there. What stopped you seeing it? It was because the rays of light, the way they were refracting through the medium of this bowl around the margins of the bowl and reaching your eye, that was what stopping it. It was always there, but it was just the reflection of light and refraction which stopped you. That's exactly how. The sun is always there, but you see the twilight first until it's reached that level. And this is a beautiful experiment to show it. So he knew exactly how to help people understand. So having done all of that, he never used science to his own personal advantage, never used science to his personal interest. He gave us the modern thresholds. He told us about how to calculate zakat and how to, using the old system and then modernizing it. He used all of that, but he always did it with one thing in mind, and that was the Quranic principles. He wanted people to understand that Quran and Sharia, they are our guides. I'm using science to support what Quran and Sharia teaches us. I'm using science to help it, make it easy for you, so that you know how to read namaz on time, how to keep fasts on time, how to calculate all of that. As long as it stays subordinate to Islam, that is the science I'm the proponent for. And that's what he does. So I think the concern nowadays is that we are so engulfed by this modern science and everything that people, you think, well, it's the era of science. What has religion got to do with that? Sayyidi Rahmatullah showed that is how you read science.
Beautiful.
Is as long as it follows the principles of Islam. That's what our viewers need to understand.
MashaAllah. My dear respected viewers of Madani Channel, that's all for today. I hope you must have benefited and enjoyed. We'll come back with another beautiful episode of Imam of Ahle Sunnah. Until next time, keep watching Madani Channel. Keep reciting Salat upon Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam. Sallu ala al-Habib sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Imam Ahmad Raza, Imam Ahle Sunnat.